Should I call the roll? Does it matter?
Oh, yep.
Oh, Jennifer?
Okay, Mormon,
Here.
Jurens.
Here.
Peters, absent. Shetty.
Here.
Allen,
Here.
Boyer,
Here.
Boleen.
Here.
Thank you.
Quorum is established. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Motion made by Councilman Allen,
Second.
seconded by Councilman Hoyer. Any conversation on that? Hearing none, the motion is to adopt the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. On our regular agenda, I could pass it off to our city manager, Alan Stager.
Thank you. Just a quick word on logistics. We are currently broadcasting live through the normal Facebook and YouTube and GovTV channels. The microphone in this room is actually in the ceiling, and so it might help if when you are talking, try to talk toward the center of the room so we can ensure that the audio is picked up. At this time, I'll turn it over to City Attorney Carrico, who's going to walk us through a presentation on the Home Rule Charter.
All right, let's get this hooked up. All right.
City Attorney Carrico, would you like questions as they come up or wait until the end?
I would say let's do them as they come up, try to make it a little interactive.
Okay.
We might not get through everything because I don't want it to be too long where then we're losing interest in people's attention span. And some of you have already heard some of this before. And also I believe we still have an executive session to do. But
Yes,
I
we
wanted to at least kind of, there could be items that come up too where I just need to do more research or may come back to council in a memo to answer some of their more detailed questions as they come along. Obviously, we're not going to regurgitate the entire home rule charter. You guys have that in your council packets. But if there is a question that comes up in there in the charter that you wanted specifically to have addressed, that's not in the slides and so forth, feel free to ask. So first of all, and this has come up before in the previous administration, I did lay out what's a law and what's a policy because we kind of get sometimes it gets a little murky. Obviously, a law is a set of standards to govern the people and their behavior, and the policy is more of guidelines, principles. Obviously, laws are less, takes more effort to amend than policies. So, and policies are, I think, more of administrative things behind the scenes, or just a general policy that you guys would like to abide by. The other thing that is available to the citizenry, the citizens of Watertown, just so you guys are aware, is the initiative process and the referendum process. Those are allowed under state statute. But when you think of initiatives, those are laws or things that the citizens want that are not already adopted. Referendums are basically the people wanting to contest or put to a vote of the people something that you guys have already enacted. So that's the general rules on the initiative and referendum process.
And Lisa, just for clarification, a lot of people think that this only happens at the statewide level. It does not. It can happen at the local level.
Correct.
But for a citizen of Watertown to either refer or initiate something, it requires a certain percentage of the people who voted at the last gubernatorial election. Is that correct?
I believe so, but I can double check on that.
And the last I knew, to refer something or initiate something, it was something along the lines of 1,600, 1,800 votes or signatures that someone would need in the community to go out and get on their own.
Correct.
And they have to be verified. So just
Yep.
for clarification's sake, if anyone is curious how that happens, that's the threshold. That's the process and that's the threshold.
Correct. And as an example, when they did the, when they would cut off Broadway south of 212, there was a
referendum
that came forward, a petition that came forward. But I believe they didn't have all of the required signatures because I remember it was not put to a vote. And I believe it had to do with the signatures required.
The process to initiate the referral or the referendum would be to contact the finance office, and they will then inform the petitioner how many signatures are required, in addition to providing the actual form to obtain the signatures on.
And so this is just a little more highlight on the referendum process. It's a legislative decision of the governing body, being the city council. It is not administrative decisions. Obviously, you guys do have some administrative power, obviously over the city manager. And it would also be to the extent that you guys adopt the personnel policies as an example, that would not be subject to a referendum vote. Under state law, your home rule charter is actually what is in the hierarchy and precedence is above state statute. Things that are not covered in the charter or statutes that are not amended by the charter, then yes, you then go to the state statutes. And then after that, it's city ordinance. And then after that, it would be your policies, whether it's our procurement, our personnel. If you guys were to adopt governance policies, then those would be. So generally speaking, under the home rule charter, the city council's duties are basically you are a part-time policy-making legislative body. Under our current home rule charter, the council is to avoid direct involvement in management and administrative matters. Those are assigned to the city manager. Your management duties are really just over the city manager. In the past, we've had stuff, basically all we ask is that you sift your comments, concerns, maybe you need more information, that sort of thing through the city manager. Now, by ordinance, the council can also establish additional powers and duties for yourself and for the mayor. And that is in the charter. So let's see here, which we get to next is the mayor's duties. So the mayor has all duties and powers as a council member, including the power to vote. He presides at all the meetings, represents the city in intergovernmental relationships, and appoints our advisory boards, committees, and commissions with the advice and consent of the city council. Now, you guys have also in your current city ordinances that when the mayor's getting ready to appoint people, is that he give you 10 days notice of who you appoint so that you guys have an opportunity to give the mayor some feedback. The mayor also presents an annual state of the message or annual state of the city message. And then this is the one that we talked about just prior. Perform other duties as specified by the city council. So if there's something that, as a collective, you guys would like to either delegate to the mayor or ask the mayor, appoint him to do, you can do that. And obviously the mayor as a voting member can say, no, I don't want to do that. And the mayor has no administrative duties because as such, we are now a city manager form of government.
Lisa, quick
Yes,
question. For us, and I guess for all bodies. So like, say we have a constituent or an interested party or something approach one of us with like contractual stuff or like has a pitch or something. And they, are asking that we're like in the room with them to discuss it or something or to bring it up to the city. Is that appropriate, or do we just tell them like, hey, like we can policy wise and like ordinance writing wise, like answered there, but like when you're negotiating with the city, that's not really our area, or is it our area?
It's kind of gray. I'm not going to say there's a clear-cut rule on it. We have had council members sit in on meetings, and sometimes they become helpful,
Right.
In negotiating and or helping appease whatever the citizens' concern is. Obviously, we would like to defer first is that staff be given that opportunity to just do it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to employees, I would say no, because that is under the administrative powers of the city manager. And because you guys are supposed to mostly be a legislative body, as an example, if an employee came to you and complained and you started to ask us questions about it even without just deferring straight to HR or the city manager, well then, even if we did what you said,
Right.
now they're thinking, hey, all I gotta do is go to a council member and ask, and they're gonna get it for me. And then it kind of takes that power away and the ability to administrate from the staff.
Sure. I guess like I'm kind of thinking of too, just because, you know, when you read the home rule charter, it doesn't say what administrative or what the duties actually are.
Right.
And so like, I always wonder, like, if you guys get in a situation where you're going to like negotiate for paint with somebody, well, you have a council member who has a history of dealing with paint. Like, you know, would you tie into that or use that expertise, or like, where is it appropriate? And I guess for me, it's just knowing, because I'm a definitions guy, like
Sure.
where our lines are or what we deem appropriate versus inappropriate. Or like if you're doing like a food vendor thing, like, yeah, I have a background in some food vending and stuff. Like, would you lean on that, or like we just, because
And
that
I
is
would
kind of an
say-
administrative thing.
It's probably subject specific.
Sure.
So like, especially with the ordinances, because you guys will eventually, it will eventually be before you, you know, to the extent that you guys, like we either have a work session or a small working group or something, those type of things are helpful. Especially with people who have different backgrounds that can add value added things to the conversation. When it comes more to negotiating contracts, and like I said, personnel issues and the general administration of the city, it really is to be the city manager and you guys talk through him. If you have a concern about how he's running things, then you bring it to him. And that's kind of what we'll be going into obviously later too, is, you know, the goal setting and just performance reviews and things like that. That's your time to say, hey, this is how I want, or would like, I should say, you know, the city to be administrated. Your other powers in being able to do that is, you know, how we adopt the personnel policies and the procurement. All of those type of things are basically telling the city manager, this is how we would like the city to be administrated. And I'll go do it within those parameters. So, all good questions.
Councilman Allen?
Yeah, when typically, and I should know this, but when typically do we do an annual State of the City address?
We stipulated that it should be in January. It was never stipulated really before.
Okay,
So now we do it at the beginning of the year. Partly because then the budget's already been passed, you know, reports have already been produced, you know, things have already been triggered of what has happened throughout the year. There was, I believe, some timing with other special city things that were happening in a different year. I can't remember if it was Ice Arena or something else was going on that we wanted to kind of tie the two together. But overall, yeah, now they do it in January. Okay. So I am bringing these up because of just past questions that I've received. So in other words, there is a whole list of everything that the city manager can do in the home rule charter. I wasn't going to bore you with reading every single one. But these questions have come up not only by citizens to me, but also from previous council and previous administration. When the council is in executive session to talk about the performance or terminate whatever it is about the city manager, you have the right as a collective, though, majority of you would need to agree to exclude the city manager from the conversation. Obviously, at some point you would bring the city manager in, but in the state statute, and here's where people get a little, in state statute, it says basically, unless you're going to terminate them. That's the only time that they're allowed outside of an executive session of the council. But the charter specifically says that when it's about it's a personnel matter, performance or termination. So basically, any time that you're trying to talk about the performance of the city manager, if you guys as a group wanted to talk collectively amongst yourselves, just your initial thoughts before, say, bringing the city manager in to talk about it, you're allowed to do that. You just all need to agree, or a majority of you. So that was a difference between the state statute and the charter, and I would have people say that to me quite often, and I'd have to correct them. So I'm just putting it out there now for the public and for you.
Quick question.
Mhm.
Yep.
Just on that, just not trying to replay history, but state statute you mentioned about home charter, takes precedence
Yep.
over state statute.
Yep.
Our home rule charter, we use Robert's Rule of Order, right? I believe, is that part of the home rule charter?
That's
right?
an HRC, yep.
Right, so if it says that you can vote in executive session, yet state statute says you can't, or is that not a statute?
No, state statute says you can't,
That you can't, but
right?
yet the home rule charter, which says that takes precedence then. So then we can vote in executive session based off of that.
Yes and no, except for Robert's Rules of Order. We usually put in that, to the extent not already covered somewhere else. So you're still gonna have the state trump you over,
Okay,
just because Robert's rules are more of, if it's gonna fall more under policy, even though, yes, the charter, I mean, it's a good question.
right, because if that's over, when I read that earlier, I thought about it, I didn't say it,
Yep.
but now I'm bringing it up because
Yep.
if that's in home rule charter and that's above
Yep.
state statute, so.
No, I think it's a very good question. And like I said, in our last year, obviously, we were trying to comply
Right.
as best we could.
Right.
But no, that's a very good question. And actually, I'd be happy to send that as a request. to
Well,
Yeah.
in the situation discussed, we all know what Lisa had decided to look at state law and I was looking at Robert's rules. Robert's rules specifically say you can. So that's what I was operating under. I did not hear that there was any reason why we could not. So obviously we will avoid doing anything.
Well, for looks, right. However, technically speaking,
Right.
Yeah.
It's a coin toss. Okay. The other thing that came up on occasion, and some of this is actually council, you have the ability to interpret and define. It would need to be collectively, not individually. But one of the other things that came up about the city manager's duties, as much as I've tried to get a clear answer on it, is be the personnel director of the city versus we have an HR manager. Part of being when I think of the personnel director, I think of them like oversight over everyone, right? Generally speaking, and over the HR manager who basically takes care of the day-to-day of the HR department. They're more strategic focused. And yes, they appoint and they can terminate. What became an issue was when the city manager would change personnel policies on their own without getting them approved by the council. The council in the charter, it actually states that you guys can adopt administrative rules and policies. And you are a policy-making body. So in this instance, what we did the last time that we adopted the personnel policies, and I did ask around, and I also asked one of our employment law attorneys that we do stuff for us on a regular basis, how do other municipalities handle that when they're in a city manager form of government? And the result, which was what we did the last time we adopted the personnel policies, was things that were financial based, because council approves the budget and has ultimate authority over the budget and money. That's the part that we had you guys adopt. The day-to-day, like whether you need to produce something in triplicate or bring a receipt to get reimbursed, well, that's more administrative. And so we kept that as something that the city manager could do on their own without coming to you saying, hey, is it okay if I change the personnel policy that they have to give me their vacation time 10 days in advance? So that's just a description of that. You guys do have a conflict of interest section in the charter. And some of the key, obviously, if you have a direct financial interest, obviously don't be accepting gifts and things of value. Acting in a private capacity on matters previously handled as a public official, misuse of confidential information to your benefit, or just misuse, period. Appearing before city agencies on behalf of private interests. You as officials are really trying to avoid the appearance of impropriety. Whether or not it's a direct conflict, you're trying to avoid that, because that's when we start to get distrust from the public And also it starts to become a slippery slope. Because then we start blurring the lines and the next thing you know, you guys are trying to handle stuff that directly affect you, which would a conflict would exist. So here's a recommendation that I had.
Lisa, real quick,
Yes,
I'm
sir.
sorry. Can we go back to the
Yep.
previous? Can you just further define the appearing before city agencies on behalf of private interests, just what that means?
Yeah, so, and we got these questions a lot, or I did, during the last administration, is when council would go to, say, the Board of Adjustment or the Planning Commission, that tended to be the hot topics,
Mhm.
to basically advocate for something or basically testify in some way when it didn't truly directly affect them. They would come on behalf of family members or other property owners. You do have that ability, but your ability is when you're in a council meeting. Now that's different, and I thought it was dealt with very appropriately. So I'm going to use this as an example because I thought it was a perfect example of when to do it, was actually Councilman Allen at the last Planning Commission meeting, because he was in the development that was the subject of what they were trying to rezone. Or no, it was a concept plan that they were trying to get the Planning Commission to adopt. And he lived in that development. And so he was basically, testifying his views, and he said he came as a citizen. I'm just talking about mine, and there were other citizens there. Versus I live in that development, but I'm coming to the Planning Commission to talk about something that's happening at the lake or in a different ward. Or yes, as a general citizen, you do have that right, but you've also chosen to be a council person, and so you have that additional layer of trying to not interfere what is basically a quasi-judicial body. Are they going to be able to separate out? And some of them have told me that, yes, I do separate it out. I mean, I understand that they're coming to me as a council person, but it's that appearance that you're trying to influence the decision before it comes to you. And they've all been appointed and come with different levels of experience to base, and they've all have also the history of other developments that they've approved, that they're coming into it with institutional knowledge and making their recommendation to you. And then you guys are, once you're in your council's seat, then you're reviewing that and you're either approving it or you're denying it. So you just want to be careful of that versus when you are directly affected. You might have gotten one of the letters, right? Because we always have to, and this is just the easiest example to talk about with Planning Commission and Board of Adjustment. Somebody's asking for a variance, but you're not one of the adjoining landowners. You know what I mean? So then it's like, okay, are you coming truly as a citizen, or are you coming as a council person that just doesn't like it, which you're allowed to do because you're trying to wear two hats, but at the same time, you just want to make sure that you're not influencing the decision before it comes to you, because otherwise, why are we even creating this quasi-judicial body? And that also goes for Park and Rec, utilities, airport. You guys have all appointed them to make these decisions. And it's one thing though, like I know that there's liaisons though to all of these, and the liaisons will come and, you might be asked as a liaison, hey, what does council think? Or or can you go back to council and ask? But generally speaking, you want to try and stay away from that. Anything else on that one? No. So one of the things that I've been, mulling over, you guys have a conflict of interest provision to avoid them. Obviously, you are supposed to do a self-assessment, and then basically, you guys have all been good about bringing up stuff or asking me, when you think a conflict might exist. But what is absent to me, which I've noticed when I've been researching case law on different issues where citizens are actually complaining about conflict of interest, is that we actually don't do a formal self-assessment. I think it would be laborious to do it on each item. I've seen a lot of boards do it at the beginning of their meeting, and they will just say, basically, and I would like to start doing that. I would like to have it on the city council agenda, that there is some sort of, right at the beginning, a self-assessment of anything that's on the agenda at that time, of whether or not a council person feels that a conflict exists and that they're not going to vote on it. I think it helps force all of council to actually look at the whole agenda and actually think about whether or not a conflict exists. They don't have to say yes or no. There's just a, hey, you know, does anyone have something on the agenda that they feel a conflict exists? Nobody says anything, you move on. If you did, so like in the case of, you know, like liquor, I know you recused yourself before, Councilman Hoyer, so I'll use you as an example. You would say, on items 1 through 4, I'm going to recuse myself. And the rest of council says nothing, then we move on. That's just my recommendation. I think it would help. I noticed when conflicts are contested, that in the cases they talk about that during the proceedings, there was this formal request and that the people did not say that there was a conflict, and the court gave that weight. In other words, they were basically like, the councilman gives his self-assessment. He's obviously come forward and said, or, you know, he didn't say that there was, so they moved on. And it was almost, it's like a box to check. So that's just something that I've thought about and I would recommend. It promotes transparency. It provides clarity. And would be a smoother meeting, because at that time, if there was another council person that felt like, wait a minute, so-and-so didn't say anything, and I think there is a conflict, you know, we get rid of that right off the bat, right? And then we can move on with the rest of the agenda.
I'd like it just so I don't have to awkwardly try and insert it at the beginning of discussion, so.
Okay, see? So, all right, so that's some of the home rule charter, state statutes. Certain acts must be done by ordinance, which is, like I said, adopting an administrative code, establishing, altering, or abolishing a city department, office, or agency. You guys have the power to do that. So obviously the city manager is the administrator, so it would be more than likely that the city manager would be coming forward and saying, hey, we've decided to consolidate, or hey, we need a new department. We think it would be more efficient. And then you guys would be establishing that or abolishing it, you know, whatever that case may be. And then anything else that's not, anything that's required by law, by ordinance, which is, as you know, Kristen has brought forward ordinances for the special monies to be, you know, transferred from, you know, place to place. She takes care of that. And that's by law that she has to do that you guys have to do that by ordinance. So this is under state law, is the council must work solely through the city manager for administrative matters except for inquiries. And I always have to advise that it's a class 2 misdemeanor if you abuse it and try to give orders to any subordinate or the city manager, or of the city manager. And in addition to fines, there can be a removal. And the other one is, this would be on a case-by-case basis, because there's always going to be, again, it gets a little gray. Basically, in the state statutes, there's a whole section that just deals with the city manager form of government. And they're basically saying that if there's some law out above that, that dealt with something that gave maybe you guys power that was already given to the city manager in state statute, just because it's listed somewhere else in the state statutes doesn't mean you get to do it. This is going to trump. Your city manager section is going to trump. Okay, any questions on that part? City ordinance. So this is in your city council procedures section. Obviously, we're going through a recodification, so there are some things that if you guys decide you want to add or tweak or whatever, you know, between now and the end of the year would be a nice time to do it. Obviously, the mayor is the chair of the city council meetings and decides all questions of order. He determines the order in which council members will speak, which obviously you guys already abide by. He appoints the standing or ad hoc committees with approval of the council. At the beginning of the year, he appoints a parliamentarian. And then that was when we talked about the 10 days prior, is that at the bottom. This was some additional stuff you guys have in your ordinance about committees. What I noticed, which we'll get to the next slide in a moment, but right now you have it in there that he may appoint any standing committee. You guys don't have anything in there about ad hoc. But they're all open to the public, receive notification, minutes are kept with finance. So that would be one that I would probably be bringing forward once we have, if there are any other revisions you guys would like to the city ordinance, is that the mayor may also appoint ad hoc committees so that it all coincides.
And then would ad hoc committees not be open to the public?
Ad hocs don't necessarily have to, but I would say you probably should. Ad hocs are temporary. So when they did the CL committee, that was not a standing committee because that goes on for, that's meant to continue. It was for a specific purpose. It was a short time and we did make it public. So
like the search committee. I mean, Reed appointed a committee to handle the search process
Council voted for it.
for the city manager.
right. So that one was, it was appropriately put together. That one wasn't public because for the most part, it dealt with personnel. So that's why it wasn't like, hey, we're going to put it on a, but they did come and give a report to the council, I believe. I don't think it was just midterm review because it didn't, what's his name, come forward. And I apologize, I'm not being as formal with what's his name. Thank you, Rob.
Peters.
Yep. Rob Peterson came and gave an update on what had been happening to the council. Oops, sorry. Let's see here. Well, let me make sure I'm getting to, okay, policy. So generally, this is just something you guys can refer back to. They're narrower in scope compared to laws. They're not legally binding in the same way as laws. It's more self-policing, warnings. When you think of personnel policies, they haven't broken the law, but we're going to sit down and say, hey, you're not following the policies. Policies are usually through administrative processes. And all of ours are, personnel policies, our procurement policies. Now with our procurement policies, it's not a law, but you are giving power to staff to be able to procure things in accordance with the procurement that you adopted. So, and we did that for ease of the council, right? So that you guys aren't getting, the invoice for $500 a paper, right? So you guys have given parameters on when they have to bid, when they have to get proposals, when they have, and most of that is in conjunction with the bidding procedures that are issued by the South Dakota Legislative Audit. So we updated, and then to the extent that we're allowed to maneuver things and change them to meet our needs, you guys have gone through that and adopted them. And again, that's what you're giving to the city manager, right, to then go and administrate. Here, we're giving you, this is your leeway, because there are certain situations where staff would be able to sign off on something without having the city manager's signature if it's under a certain threshold. And certain bidding, requests for proposals, things have been met.
Lisa, another
Yep.
question, if I may.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm just a little bit confused by it. So we have the home rule charter,
Mhm.
and then we have city ordinances that stand, I don't know, next to that, or does one trump the other? So can by ordinance we change something that's in the home rule charter?
Can't trump the charter, you could basically add how they're going to do something under the charter. So one of the things, as an example, under the charter that you guys have is obviously, it's like approval and administrative rules for the budget. How do you administrate the budget? You guys could create either by ordinance or by a policy, some sort of directive to the city manager as that would be just more than just, we've adopted the budget. You could say, we've adopted the budget, but we still want you to come back on X, Y, Z before moving forward. Basically. But yes, good questions, but no, the HRC will still trump you. It's just you get to get a little more refined on the how they're going to administer that power under the HRC, but you couldn't take away the power, if that makes any sense.
So and sorry, I'm just trying to think my way through it. So the home rule charter says the mayor has no administrative duties.
Correct.
But ordinance-wise, we as a council could adopt an ordinance that says the mayor evaluates the city manager annually.
Yes.
So we could do something like that. So in effect, we could give or maybe remove powers that currently reside in the home rule charter or direction that the home rule charter has.
You couldn't remove them. So of course, you guys are still basically the entire administrative oversight of the city manager, but you could delegate what I'm going to call like the ministerial tasks about that to the mayor. I think that would be the best way to put it. So you could say, hey, compile, we want you to, get our feedback on each issue, or hey, could you come up with, 10 things that we should be looking at for the city manager, and then we'll, go over them and see how we feel about it. And, as far as a performance review or goal setting, the mayor can be the catalyst that, is organizing all of that and conveying it to the city manager ultimately. However, keep in mind too, that you would still have to abide by, in this specific instance, the city manager's contract, I believe, says that all of you meet with him. So you'd still have to abide by that because contractually you guys agreed to it. So, yeah. Okay for now? Don't be shy. Okay, now we're getting into stuff that is not in place. And by putting them up here, I am not advocating that you adopt them. What I'm pointing out to probably more for the benefit of the newer council members is just things that were at one point governance policies. So that's something too, when you guys are talking about like what can we, delegate to the mayor, or how you guys decide to interact with yourselves, how you guys decide collectively to do certain things, you can create governance policies. These I have not tweaked. I wasn't necessarily, so in other words, I'm not endorsing the language. And some may spark your interest and some may not, but they were actually in my old slides. So I thought when I did this presentation the last time, and I thought about deleting them, and then I was like, nah, maybe I'll leave them in here just for the sake of discussion. So one of the things was here, in the case of requesting information or assistance without council authorization, the city manager may turn to the council for guidance, especially when such requests will require an inordinate amount of staff time or funds, or are disruptive to the efficient operation of the city. So what I had mentioned at that time was, and I'm not saying this has happened currently, is sometimes a council member will come to the city manager and say, hey, I want to know X, or I'm going to pick on the East Side Fire Station right now. I don't want to say pick on it. I mean, it's something that the council's already looking into, but as an example, only one council person comes forward and says, I want to know all the ins and outs of putting up an East Side Fire Station, and I want to know whether we should have, ambulance or, EMTs and I want to know if we should do a volunteer fire department. I want to know, just all these different things. Well, that's a lot of work. Obviously we're doing it right now because we do want it and we're recommending it to council. But let's say it was just a blank slate and they come forward and say, hey, I want to do all of this. And the city manager's like, well, geez, that's a lot of work. At what point he may come to council then and say, hey, is this something that you all care about? Because I'm about to get my staff to put aside other things that they're working on and start focusing all their effort on this. And if only one or two of you are interested and the rest of you are like, no, I'm not interested, well, then that's probably not the good use of city staff time. And what happens when he gets conflicting information? What is his direction? Is he putting it on the agenda because you guys don't decide? Is he not doing anything because you guys don't decide? Now, with the current city manager, you guys might all have a pretty good parameter for communication, and the city manager, and then I would also defer to Alan as to how he would like to have that communication, because obviously it's affecting him as well. But obviously communication is the key, and it's just how are you guys communicating so that he understands what he's supposed to be doing and what to put on a council agenda and what not. And other than the two of you two council people coming forward and saying, I want X on an agenda. Now, right now, you guys have been pretty good about using the council input for future topics, to be able to say, hey, this is what I would like, and that helps. But these are just things that came up in the past. And so I just wanted to point that out. I'm not saying it's a problem to be solved right now. I'm just saying it's something that had come up in the past. This one I thought was kind of odd. This was about monitoring the executive's performance. Basically, the city manager his job is to make sure that the policies you've set and the laws that are in place, that they're all being followed. But there might be times where things are, there's a maneuvering, we didn't follow it, and maybe it was intentional. Like it couldn't fit, round peg, square hole. He has the ability to do that. It's just that afterwards, if it was a true ongoing problem to be fixed, then he needs to come to you guys and say, hey, how do you want me to fit the round? I need to make this hole round so it will fit the round peg. Let's see. So we've had, obviously, take action through motion, vote during a public meeting in order to give formal direction to the city manager. I would say that's on like big picture type stuff. Obviously, just general day-to-day administration. This might be something where you basically give that ability to the mayor. If it was something small, I don't know how to explain that very well. I'm probably mucking it up right now. We would like to have a grand opening for the ice arena. Let's just say that was something, we did have that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was really administrative. And he did it, or, the city manager did it. But that would be something where it's like, do we really need council to go and do a motion in a second to say, hey, we want to have a grand opening of the ice arena?
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say, I guess the only thing I would see in that is if it had a financial demand or something that would need extra budgeting for.
Yep.
But otherwise, I'd say we just leave it alone.
Right.
We're on the same page.
Cool.
And how much of a budget does get used before we have a voice in it?
And that's a good, and I'm glad you brought
We're
it up.
gonna eventually get into this. We might as well open it up right now.
Set a threshold.
You guys have the ability now to say, this is how we want, this is the additional information that we want to know when we're approving the budget. We need you to tell us a little more detail, or, and you also have the ability to say, when you're presenting something to us, Although I know as staff, we've already talked about it internally, but you have the ability to say, you know what, when you present items, especially if it's capital, I want to know the pros and cons. If you're telling me something, I want in my summary, pros, cons, what you already considered and discarded, like why you're recommending this course of action. You guys have the ability you could do that as a policy. Right now, I mean, it does happen anyway because you guys ask questions and then we give the answers, but you could actually do that as a policy and tell the city manager when you're putting stuff on the agenda, here's what we want to know.
Yeah, I mean, it's always great for us to know how you got to where you got to and why you chose that course.
Probably creating more work for you.
Aha.
But budget-wise, yes, because I know that's been, discussed on more than one occasion. So with the budget, absolutely, you guys could set parameters on how you want the budget presented, just in the sense of additional information that you would want, so that we know.
I would argue too that even on other issues that aren't budget related, it would be nice to have a presentation that outlines, I don't know if you want to say pros and cons or how we got here or why we're making the recommendation. I think about the ramps at the dump. Well, how did we get there, right? And then it takes, people go out and they do a review and they go, yeah, I don't think this, I don't know why we're doing this, so we're not going to do it. So I would argue that in that particular instance, it would have been valuable to have had a rationale put forward for this is why we're proposing to do this in this particular way.
Well, and I would agree just in the sense of I like knowing there was an actual problem we were solving, as opposed to maybe this was just a good idea fairy.
I agree with you guys completely. And that's something I'm doing as we develop the staff to operate at a different level in our organization. We've got to get good at presenting ideas concisely and get down to Michael's point. What is the problem we're trying to solve and why do we think this is the best way to solve it?
I would think most of us on council would take that as a common sense measure and just say there was one recent thing that we can point to that was probably not prepared well enough. And as you could see as to how it transpired, we all said this isn't ready and we shut it down, but yeah.
So do you mind if I just dig into a couple other past things?
Yeah. No, please. Yeah.
Get over it?
Absolutely.
So some of the complaints that coming from a layperson, citizen for 30 years, but some of the things that have been most controversial the last 2 years are budget items. And complaints from citizens going, how did that ever get approved? How did buying vehicles of this caliber get approved without anyone else having any say in it? How did the budget for, you brought it up, the open house at the
I
ice
didn't know
arena?
that was an issue. Was that an issue? I don't even know.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm just using it as an example. I didn't even know. I couldn't
Well,
think of
then,
anything that we
now
had
everyone
anymore.
knows because this is public, the green light's on. There were plenty citizens
Okay.
that questioned those sorts of things.
Right. Mhm.
And so it's an example. I'm
Right.
not going back.
Yep.
It's over.
Sure.
Those are things going forward that I see council doesn't need to be there micromanaging that stuff. Yet it's good for those of us to know things involving what's the travel policies. Again, that's one more really controversial thing that we dealt with the last 2 years. There's just, those are my 3 examples, but there's going to be more.
Sure.
Yet how city manager Stager handles them could be
Really different.
entirely different, and the public perception could quickly change.
I would like to take at least that to some extent because of 2 reasons. Number one, I think this is an opportunity for the council to dictate how we want this handled. And number 2, I would like to caution the council in general. I mean, those are good examples, and they are real life examples of what we went through and what we need to resolve in the current form of council going forward. But with that said, I would prefer looking forward from looking back. It doesn't do us much good looking back at these particular events and what went wrong, but what we can say is, in the case of a city vehicle being purchased under the auspices of a city employee in a department, it fit just under what we as a council had stipulated required to, anything above a certain amount had to be brought to council. This was just underneath it. So it was technically handled correctly.
Yeah.
That is an example of where probably going forward, if we are working with City Manager Stager and just have a better understanding, technically that was correct by the letter of the law, by the spirit of the law, it was in violation, I would say. Or let's say it was a gray area under the spirit of the law, because that probably was something that could have been brought forward to council. In the past, there had been other examples where vehicles were brought forward to council for consideration. I remember certain parks and rec vehicles, boom trucks, things like that, that were brought to council. So to pick and choose what gets brought forward to council and what did not in the past, I think if we just said, that's something that we can formulate. The other thing is with this council working with our new city manager, there were definitely there was public skepticism about travel, certain expenditures, parties. They were all technically legal expenditures, again, because at the beginning of the year, each department was given X amount of money. And those departments could spend money up to that level. Decisions were made by staff to spend that money. Technically, it did not require council oversight because we had already appropriated the money. We did not appropriate the item nor the event, but we had appropriated the money. That was definitely something that council had grown frustrated with, and something that we need a better understanding of. Sorry, City Manager Stager.
Two comments, really. Number one, as we look at objectives for myself and the team for the coming 5 months, you'll see there are quite a few things in establishing some of the basics of financial transparency, which have been lacking. That's the first comment. The second comment I'll have, and I'll look back just as far as the last council meeting. You will recall we did a fairly large budget supplement. As I've reviewed that in hindsight, and I haven't had a chance to talk to our chief financial officer, I would have preferred to have done that as a budget transfer. And by doing it as a transfer, then we can show you exactly where we are going to underspend to cover the items where we need to overspend, or where we have areas of grant revenue coming in to cover the items. Because if I go back 62 days in my past and say, I'm a citizen sitting there and I saw that transfer, I would have been concerned, because I have to go ask for the rest of the story. And so that's one thing I want to do for you guys and the public too.
I was just gonna say, City Manager Stager, I think the public, I think that'd be a wonderful idea. You know, if we gotta take $100,000 and add into, you know, something special throughout the year like that, if we can show that, hey, it's not that we're just spending that much more, it's just we're not spending here, but we'll move it to there. You know, I think the general public would be very satisfied knowing that kind of stuff.
And isn't the rationale in part for budget supplements to happen mostly at the end of the year when you kind of know where you're at? So it makes that kind of decision more transparent, just because you know this is where we're at and this is.
It does, but I would also say that I think budget transfers are an important control tool to make sure that we're not just relying on memory, that at the end of the year, we know what's a transfer and what's truly a supplement.
Agreed.
So to bring it all back, which very, very good information, that's on that night of that supplement, I was remote and I wasn't hearing the question, and I don't know if everyone was hearing my comments, but that was my question. Where are we giving up to give in? So thank you. Very, very, very good discussion right here on that issue. Appreciate it.
As an example, I don't want to belabor that, but I knew it was an issue, right? Travel. Your conduit is, well, first of all, when the budget comes out and there's travel, I mean, you would have the ability to say, hey, City Manager Steger, how are you? You know, what kind of travel are these people taking? What's, you know, is it licensing? Is it whatever? Issues come up when, obviously, we all know Facebook and you guys get all sorts of stuff from the citizens of Watertown regarding what people did on their trips or how were the trips. You know, that would be something where you would go to the city manager and say, hey, we'd like you to establish a policy to make sure that the travel is beneficial to what we're trying to accomplish, not just a free-for-all fun weekend, right? Or whatever, week for the employee. You would not be able to say, I would caution against it because now we're starting to get administrative. I want to see the travel reports. I want to see the travel reports of every employee. Well, that's his job.
Right.
But you wanting to make sure that it's getting taken care of appropriately so that you can respond to your citizens, that's what you're going to the city manager about.
Well,
I mean, that got kind of muckied up when that came up the last time as to how that should all be laid out.
I think it kind of does fall back, though, a little bit on the council that we need to be actually going through the budget much deeper if we're concerned about those sorts of things. Just because, I know there were concerns too about like how many trainings people went to in a year and stuff like that. But like, I don't know that we necessarily establish a hard line on that, but like, if they have a budget and they're free to use it how they see fit, I mean, that's delegating it. Well, but we need to make sure we know what that is and is realistic.
That's where it gets to be interesting. Just because we have the budget doesn't mean we're freely able to spend it, at least in personal lives. And it's hard for citizens to wrap their arms around that, oh, hey, we have 30,000 in the budget. By the end of the year, if we don't use it up, it's gone. Why use it up?
Well, we're not doing military spending, so I don't think it's a use it, you lose it sort of situation, but like.
Yeah, it's not use it or lose it, but I will say that there is some level of military spending that has gone on previously where if something.
Oh, for sure, I get it.
If something wasn't spent, then the department said, oh, well, I didn't spend $5,000. I now have $5,000 to spend.
But my point is that like, I think we delegate that discern to, of course, the city manager to figure that stuff out. But then, if we are hearing rumblings, then we should, this is my opinion, just address Alan on it. And, again, too, like for me, it's always, we'll use training because that's an easy one. If they're going to a school or a conference, is it something that's actually developing them in their career and their field, making them a better asset to the city? Or is it kind of the example, just going out for the Catalina wine mixer? Like, it's just a fun weekend.
Is that a Step Brothers?
Yes, it was a Step Brothers. But, anyone that's been in a big organization knows that, like, there are those events too, but like, there's some trainings that are more effective and help you develop, and then some less so.
Right.
I'll just point out, and we'll be going through the budget in coming months. I'm about halfway through detailed budget reviews with all of the staff. And the questions I've been asking and the approach, I think, is different than they've ever seen before. And one of the things our chief financial officer and I are looking at is what is the targeted level of fund balance that we want at the end of the year in each fund. And that's an additional control to make sure that we don't have reckless spending. And that targeted level of fund balance, then, the questions that I'm asking and that Kristen is working with me on is, the council has a 5-year plan. We actually have a requirement under the Home Rule Charter to have a 5-year financial plan. What is the fund balance required to hit that 5-year plan, which is directly tied into your vision? So if we start to elevate our decision-making to that level, some of this stuff becomes self-policing because nobody should have time to go on a boondoggle to taste the Catalina wine.
Mm-hmm.
Councilman Jerns?
I'm in agreement with everything you're saying. I believe we're on the same page. This is the difference, right? This right here. Are there or can there be incentives? That's what's so challenging about in the non-public world, the private sector versus the government sector, is where's the incentives? Well, Alan's putting a little of that in there by saying, implementing your idea. So thanks, Alan.
Bottom line thing,
Yes,
we're
sorry.
already ahead of where we were.
And I don't know the city manager's thoughts on this right at this moment as I'm asking this question, but it was something that came up. So I'm putting poor city manager Stager on the spot here. Is there have also been questions, so I'd be curious to know your guys' intake, both those that were previously already on council and those new, is the whole concept of, well, the budget's been approved, so I get to go spend it. You know, it's kind of the same concept, right? I would always get questions, well, they approved the budget, so they've approved the purchase. I'm like, well, yes and no. I mean, because remember, council too, that for certain things, it still has to come back to you. The contract, depending on what amount it is, if it's in procurement, though, that they could do it without your approval because it's under a certain dollar amount, you know. And again, this all goes to how you guys ask your questions and give direction to the city manager on the budget that he's presenting to you, because it is the city manager presenting the budget. But it was almost like there was a misconception that stuff didn't have to come back to council. And while, yes, there are certain things that would not come back to you, such as, hey, this is how much we spent on postage, you know, yes, if we're buying, a boom truck or something, yes, we're going to have to come back to you anyway because of how the procurement policy is. And if there's certain things about the budget that, whether it's the donations to external organizations, to what extent you guys want to be involved, that would be between you and this city manager Stager. And then I'll turn it over to you if you had any additional comments on that.
I maybe just say this: a budget is a plan at a point in time. The difference with a budget, from a governmental standpoint, is we actually give approval authority to go execute on that budget. We also have provisions in our charter, for example, if the sales tax revenue is off, we've got provisions in our charter to revisit that budget, so that we have a different plan at a point in time and to go back and revisit the governmental authority's approval of that budget. So my point is it shouldn't be static. Now, on the other hand, it shouldn't be one trip or one trend or something's off a week and we redo the whole thing. But if we're communicating in the right way about financial priorities and where we're at in a budget versus actual, we will all know and see the right answer.
This is probably a little repetitive. We mentioned it earlier in the presentation, which is the committees and standing versus ad hoc. Standings are meant to be permanent, open-ended. Your ad hocs are for a limited and temporary purpose. And then this was a previous governance policy, because I would say the ones that council's created since I've been here were mostly limited purpose and they needed to be, I mean, and they were appropriate. I guess part of it is you just need to be that you're not just creating committees for the sake of, you guys already have your boards. This also used to be non-city manager form of government. So your boards needed power, your subcommittees, there were more subcommittees because in essence, while the mayor was managing, the council was helping, right? And now you have a city manager form of government. So it's just you guys filtering your stuff through the city manager and they're going out. So you just want to be careful of that when you don't want to get into a ton of subcommittees where it's almost like you're starting to manage.
Right.
And that's it for that one. The other one's much shorter.
Real quick, I think touching on that though, like that we are filtering things through the city manager, I think it would kind of behoove us as a council to find an efficient means of doing that. Like something I've just been fearful of since coming on to council is like, I know how long and chatty I can get with the city manager if I sit down and start talking. And like, I'm just worried sometimes, like how much of your day do you lose to us when you could be doing other things?
Not as much as you might think.
Okay.
Especially the first 30 to 45 days, everybody, and not just the council, the staff, other organizations, people are too respectful of my time. And honestly, I thought I've got to get engaged. I've got to get everybody engaged. Michael, I have kind of a routine. Your Mondays, Brent is Mondays, Mayor is typically a Wednesday, Doug is typically early in the morning. Lynn is on the phone about 4 at night and Dan's early in the morning. I mean, we kind of have the routine.
Okay. I suppose that is just something we can put to you anyway. Yeah. I just want to make sure we're an aid as opposed to hindrance.
That's a good thing to ask though, because we want to be ahead of it. And one of the ways is, to the extent that we can, one-on-one meetings are great. They build a bond that cannot be had if you're having group meetings, but when information is being shared just for the sake of sharing information, those 3-on-1 meetings or 2-on-1 meetings does save a lot of time. Plus it also helps because there's another set of ears in the room hearing the exact same thing. So
I'd also put this forward, and whether it's 2-on-1 or 3-on-1, as we've gone through the preliminary objectives of the city manager's office, you'll notice there are 4 broad categories. And what I would enjoy doing and find benefit in is as we form those cohorts for the 2-on-1 or the 3-on-1, we focus a cohort on a broad category of objectives. So for instance, 2 of you may be on the people and personnel side, and 2 of you may be on the council vision side of that. Would allow me to start to develop some more cohesiveness in terms of working with the cohorts of council people on specific objectives. And then I'm not taking everybody through everything.
okay, on to the shorter presentation.
Here. All right. This actually, I do want to premise, because everybody likes to, start getting in their heads as to why there was no incident or whatever that we decided to do this training. It was just trying to be proactive. As the city council, albeit you are sifting through the city manager, you are the governing body of the city, which is basically the employer of all city staff. So your actions can create legal liability for the city. Even informal comments or interactions with staff may affect working conditions. So the expectation is just remain professional and free from any undue influence or appearance of bias. So obviously there's what we call categorized harassment, which is based upon your race, gender, religion, disability. It must be severe or pervasive enough to create a hostile work environment. This can be done whether it's a one event or whether it's over time with repetitive events. It doesn't have to be intentional. It's mostly about the receiver. We do, obviously, in order for us to act on something, especially in a government context, we need the person to come forward. We need them to complain, basically, file out their concern, their complaint, whatnot. What was interesting is so we as attorneys now in South Dakota, we have to take training. It is required, and we took the training, and I noticed over time, because I've been an attorney for a while now, it always used to be about the conduct itself, and now there is this twist of focus of kind of a see something, say something. So even though you were not the recipient, if you see it or someone has mentioned it to you, there's kind of this heightened push for the person to come forward and basically almost complain on that other person's behalf. It was interesting. It wasn't something that I had encountered in the past. I did do employment law for a long time when I first started as an attorney. And so there it was always, they had to come and complain. And in the government context, you do, because otherwise we don't know, we can't address it. But there is kind of this prevailing see something, say something. So if you as counsel see something, or, again, if staff sees something, it would behoove them to, because we just don't want it to escalate. And we want to make sure that any miscommunication is addressed in that environment. So just a general, not what I'm going to call category based, which is your race, gender, religion. Just creating a hostile environment for some can be publicly criticizing staff during meetings, unwelcome or overly personal interactions, joking or gossiping, obviously, about the protected categories, intervening in staff decisions or investigations, reaching out to staff directly about permitting or enforcement. It's all about perception. Staff, the way I've always seen our city staff is they truly want to help. You guys come in and ask questions and stuff. They truly want to turn around and drop what they're doing to help you because you're the city council. It's just a fine, if it's something about you, obviously, yes, you have to go. If it's you're trying to get a permit or you're trying to, get a zoning request, yes, you're going to go to Brandy or you're going to go to Carla, you're going to go to city staff. You just want to be careful and more cognizant about what you're doing, what you're saying, how you're approaching them, because it can be stressful for the employee if a council person is constantly coming to them about issues when in fact you should be going to the city manager. It does create stress on employees. It has in the past. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to extricate themselves or say politely, hey, that's not you got to go to the next person up. You got to go to the department head. And so I just wanted you guys to be cognizant of that. Obviously.
Quick thing on
yep,
that.
Yep.
I caught my earlier on the city manager form of government under SDCL 9-10-16.
Which is?
I mentioned the council must work solely through city manager for administrative matters except for inquiries. So I guess it's how we handle inquiries. Like, for example, today I contacted Councilman Hoyer's wife just on a flashing sign thing.
Right.
Because a gentleman asked me and he wasn't even being upset about it. He just was, she told him, reach out to a councilman.
Yep.
And so I called her up. I go to Alan and go to him to inquire about how this policy is, or my Alan's got enough on this, but does he really want to deal with that? And so I'm like, if it was an inquiry. So I called her up how that played out. And I even prefaced it with, hey, let her know, hey, I'll contact Alan if I need to. And I'm not even trying to say what to do or not to do. I'm trying to be even more protective of that.
No.
So it doesn't get read that way. But it was just inquiry, just what's the policy? Yep. How does that work? So I know how to better talk with the gentleman.
And finance staff gets it a lot too, because you guys get just general knowledge. I just want to know. It's the positions where, and this has happened, where council will go to, the city planner or community development or engineering, they'll be like, well, staff is getting ready to recommend one thing, and then they go to that individual and say, well, but we could do it this way. What do you think about it? Don't you think we should do it this way? And then that person's put on the spot because they're thinking, well, yeah, I voiced it during a meeting and said, hey, this is something we could do. And now this council person keeps coming to me going, yeah, but you said that, we could do it this way, right? And you want to do it this way. And now that person's stressed out because now they're in a council meeting and they're like, well, so-and-so said we could do it. And now the department head is like, well, wait a minute. General inquiries and knowledge, yes. I would say if you're truly wanting to know, again, that's why I went back to what really should happen is, City Manager Steger, we'd like to know the pros and cons. And what other stuff was, can this be done? What were the other options? And that would, I think, alleviate staff being put on the spot in certain situations where this is what we're recommending and why. And then you guys get to ask questions and whatnot, but it gets away from this back door like, hey, but you agree to this, right? Okay, well, now I'm going to, put that person on the spot when I'm in a meeting and say, well, they said we could do this, oh, yeah, okay. It wasn't what staff was recommending and why, and now we're having it's unprofessional.
I think a good example of that was a city landfill. Instead of going to the landfill supervisor, went to Alan and said, okay, Alan, what's going on here? Let's work through that. And then he set up a meeting. We went out there, made a good conversation.
Yep.
So it's what this wisdom and when to navigate through with the city manager versus just inquiring of something, depending on what the inquiry is, I guess.
I would offer this. If your intent truly is just an inquiry and it's a relatively simple answer, feel free to ask, feel free to call or send an email. But also be ready and I will be informing the staff, if it's more than a simple inquiry and it's going to take research or it's going to take some judgment or somebody's asking for a recommendation, then we should all get involved and I should get involved in that. But feel free to continue to call Planner Hoyer with questions on flashing signs because I'm just going to go see her anyway.
So obviously harassment is, based on the protected classes, which we talked about, bullying, stereotyping. It can be between officials, staff, or the public. If you want to be, unfortunately, you're an elected official. You got to be, higher bar here. And then the sexual harassment, again, is obviously unwanted sexual conduct or attention, innuendo, jokes, comments, touching. Can often include power dynamics or retaliation. And you just need to be aware. I usually tell people, if it's not something that you would want, when it comes to sexual harassment, it's not something that you would want someone to do to your grandmother, your mother, your daughter, or your wife, then, or vice versa, then, it's all equal here, right? So same thing. If you don't want it done to your grandpa, your dad, or your son, or your nephew, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. The other one that I usually tell people is, do you want to hear about what does it sound like to you being told back to you when you're on a stand in court? How do you think it's going to be perceived? How do you think the text message will be perceived? How do you think the email will be perceived? Read back to you in court under some or other, adversarial circumstances, then you probably shouldn't do it. So those are the two kind of rules of thumb that I usually tell my clients, my individual clients. So, again, we haven't had any problems. So, but again, we just thought we'd be proactive in doing that. And that is it. Unless you have any questions. Yes, sir.
So 2 questions. One would be something that I don't anticipate ever happening is, let's say you have a complaint about Alan.
Yes.
Where does the complaint go? So you bring it to a council person and say, I'm really uncomfortable with the way Alan's treating me. If you bring that to council, I assume we take it to HR.
It is, my opinion is that it still should be taken to HR because they're most versed with how to handle those things, even though, yes, it does involve their boss, right? In the past, when, you know, the HR manager and I have discussed it, it would kind of, if it was me, obviously I would go to HR and you. If it was somebody else, you know, another department head or maybe a subordinate employee, it should follow through HR, and then HR would probably involve me, and the both of us would be coming to you as counsel, both HR and the city attorney, to help kind of get through how to address it, where then you guys would be addressing it with the city manager. And that could be something where internally you guys are like, we're going to delegate that, you know, communication task to the mayor, you know, or the mayor and the deputy mayor, you know, something of that nature. Or you could do it collectively. It's not required that you do it collectively, you know, but I just feel like the HR manager is well versed in all aspects of how to deal with these situations, as is the city attorney. So those would be the two that would be activated, so to speak, to come to the council and help get it addressed.
So looking at it a different way, and you'll see one of my objectives is to look at a mechanism for the reporting of issues and concerns. The way the private sector typically handles it is utilizing an independent third party or a third party hotline. And then if there were an issue with the CEO, there's typically a standing committee of the board of directors, or in this case, perhaps mayor, deputy mayor on the council, that the third party would work with. We're not there yet, but I think from a concept standpoint, that's the direction we should go, especially in light of the reporting that we heard from the Home Rule Charter Committee. I think a small investment in a third-party service to ensure that we have a true anonymous ethics reporting hotline is the right thing.
I would just like to second that. That's very good, because I can testify from my own experiences that HR is usually there to protect the company, not the employee. And I have no confidence whatsoever in an HR system, so I would really appreciate a third party.
It was definitely something that came up in the midterm review that had been something expressed, which was, what is the mechanism to arbitrate delicate situations like that? So.
It triggered something when you guys just talked about that, and I didn't know if the new council members knew, but just so you know, not affiliated with this type of process, but for things in city ordinance where there's no dispute mechanism, but it is a decision of the city, like administratively, that someone has an issue with, goes to an administrative appeal. We have we hire a local attorney in town to be basically the administrative law judge, and they oversee what the issue was. The person comes forward, they talk about whatever their complaint was, and it's basically whether or not it's ultimately the city manager's decision. So it's almost like things that aren't appealable have a specific mechanism in the ordinances. So one of the examples is actually the taxi cab license. We did have we denied one, we had an appeal, and that person appealed it. And so we hired an administrative law judge to handle that. And that is in city ordinance, is that section. And I wasn't sure if you guys were aware of that, and that's what we did. So, and we hired a local attorney in town, and he did a very good job. And that's also in my budget. So it's just a small amount to pay that person. Yep.
I would echo what Councilmember Moorman said about the value of your suggestion to have a third party. I think it's just good practice.
It's on my schedule of things to look at, and quite honestly, it's something I'd like some input from the South Dakota Municipal League, as I believe it is a service they can provide us and other municipalities.
That's it.
All right.
We're done.
I'll open public comment. Is there anyone who would like to address the council? I'll close public comment. We do have a reason to go into executive session. I will take a motion to do so. We will not take action when we're done. So Jennifer, I'll keep track of who adjourns and let you know so that you can go home and be with your family.
Okay, thank you.
Make a motion.
Motion made by Councilman Shetty, seconded by Councilman Allen. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, all those in favor of going into executive session, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Okay, we've got